The story of when gold caused inflation. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ainslie Insights, brought to you by Ainslie Bullion, Ainslie Crypto, and the Gold and Silver Standard as the Ainslie Group celebrates 50 years. Today, welcome back Alex, who wrote a really interesting article in the news today, a fascinating story from history that might have some relevance and significance for what we're seeing happening today. How are you going, Alex?
I'm going well. How are you?
I'm going very well. I just love this story today. It actually showed the ignorance that I have from my knowledge of history, because I didn't realize that this guy, Mansa Musa, was the richest man to have ever lived. And you just wrote this fascinating story about his sort of history, what happened there with gold. Really interesting. Give us the big picture overview of what you talked about today.
Okay, so Mansa Musa was, they say, twice as rich as Elon Musk in today's terms. The reason he was because he controlled the trade through Africa. When they discovered gold, they discovered salt. So the dynasty, I guess, started around the 12th century. He took over in 1307. Was in power from till about 1337, I think. I've read some different numbers, 1332 as well, but let's just go with that for today. And he basically cornered, I guess, the trade in West Africa back up to Europe in a place called Timbuktu, which is awesome. So you and I before were talking about Timbuktu, we always thought referred to Australia, but maybe the fact that no one knew where Timbuktu was goes back to when the Europeans did not know where Timbuktu was. And this very wealthy man turned up on Cairo's door with huge amounts of gold. And everyone's like, where's Timbuktu? So he was from Islam. He was Islamic. That's what I'm trying to say. And he basically united West Africa in such a big way that it was, compared to the Mongol, it was the second biggest empire. So, you hear about the Mongols, you hear about Egypt. This guy was pretty impressive. And they were one of the strongest empires from Mali. So Mansa of Musa from Mali. For 300 years, and he controlled gold mines, copper mines, salt mines, and trade through Europe. So he was an incredibly impressive man.
And it was just such an interesting story of what he did on that journey. Do you want to just step us through what happened there with the gold? Because that had massive consequences at the time.
So it's pretty interesting that gold caused inflation way back then. So being Islamic, he decided to take a pilgrimage to Mecca. Being the wealthiest man in the world, he packed up his 60,000 men, his 12,000 servants or slaves, his 300 camels with about 140 kilos of gold on the back of each of the camels. His slaves all carried a staff that weighed about 2.5 kilos. He was carrying billions of dollars worth of gold on his pilgrimage to Mecca, and no one had heard of this guy from Europe. And suddenly he pops up in Egypt and on the way to Mecca and just starts spending his gold like it's the US dollar. So he just started buying through the markets. He gave 50,000 dinar to the Egyptian ruler at the time, which was about $26 million equivalently of gold today. So he just came into this market and said, here's my gold from all his mines in West Africa, and flooded the market with gold, so much so that gold depreciated against silver. And the depreciation lasted for 12 years and depreciated gold by about 20%.
Just a fascinating parallel, I suppose you could say, with what we've seen in modern history. And I think that was the point you were trying to make with the article, because think about that gold giveaway, just all of a sudden everyone's rich, but there's consequences of that people need to understand. And can you talk to us a little bit about that? Like when you think about the modern quantitative easing or what the currency printing that happened post-COVID, during COVID, with all of that, are there parallels as you see them with just coming in and giving everyone money? It doesn't make everyone richer.
Well, I mean, we all know that now. I think, all that money was given away everyone feels poorer and the rich feel richer. The wealth gap's growing. So that's fundamentally what's happened now. My parallel in today's article was about the fact that Elon Musk is getting up and giving $1 million away, like it's gold dinar to the Egyptian rulers and the Egyptians. This guy was doing the same with gold. He had so much of it, it didn't matter. When someone has so much of something and other people have so little of something, it, you know, everything suddenly becomes more expensive. If you need a loaf of bread to live, you don't need a dinar of gold. You need a loaf, but everyone needs a loaf. So everyone starts bidding up the loaf of bread, and suddenly everything else becomes scarcer. So, you know, we're still looking at what the real implications are of the COVID inflation. Everyone's saying it's over. Well, in Cairo, this inflation lasted for 12 years. It took a long time to go through. Those sorts of shocks, I don't believe, are fixed in 4 years like everyone's claiming they are.
And I want to talk about that a little bit more. This idea of the 12-year recovery there. Do you think, like, in some ways that could disperse because that was effectively one person going and doing that, and then ultimately prices go up? You've sort of had that single inflation shock, but the difference today would probably be the fact that money printing has continued and will continue because you've got debt on debt. So it was funded very differently from someone just coming in with their money and giving it away to a government creating that money out of nowhere and then having to pay interest on that. So the 12 years, that could be, we could be very, that would be like a very lucky wish for us for that to be over in 12 years when you think about that parallel, surely. Like, it could be much longer.
Well, I think so, but if you think about where the concentration of wealth has gone, yes, it went to everyone, but everyone's now out of money because the inflation was so big, and it's concentrated up. Maybe it won't be 12 years, maybe it'll be shorter, but ultimately, where everyone is right now is everyone just feels poorer, and they probably are in a loaf of bread scenario, as opposed to a gold scenario or a US dollar scenario. But when you cheapen a currency so much to someone like Elon Musk, but you make it so scarce compared to the general population, you know, the want and the need, and then the frivolous nature of the other side, you know, makes people angrier. And I think, you know, Elon Musk is doing a lot of good for society and the world, and kudos to him. But, you know, if he can give away $1 million a day, that's insane.
And you've just made me think, like, when you were explaining that, I hadn't really thought about from this angle, but the concentration of wealth going up, as you've described there, kind of makes sense in this modern setup that we have, because you could ultimately argue that people like Elon Musk are only as rich as they are because they're sort of like sucked, all that money gravitates towards them because they're producing the things that everyone's buying. Do you think that, like, there was really the start of the decline occurring when it was so concentrated back in the time that you're talking about in the article? Is potentially the Elon Musk effect here a bell ringing, warning us about the end of the run here as well? Is there something in that?
Well, I mean, Mansa gave all his money away. So, well, no, he didn't. During the pilgrimage, he gave a lot away.
Yeah.
And then everyone started fighting about the wealth in the end. It was, you know, the empire lasted another 300 years, but there was infighting for power and things like that. Yeah, to me, if you can give that much away and it's so concentrated, it probably means that we're in for some fighting.
Yeah, and the instability makes sense in that environment because people are inherently volatile. And if it's highly concentrated, then it's just going to amplify that volatility, you would think.
Oh, yeah. And we know that it's just has become over the last, probably since the GFC, really, maybe 2000, the concentration is becoming crazy. I think it started 1970s, in fact, when we first had that first inflation shock. You know, people's wages have not kept up with corporations' wealth and CEOs and owners' wealth. So, yeah, we're 6 years through, I guess, wealth creation for the wealthiest people only.
So last question, just sort of to finish exploring this concept, we've talked about gold because gold in this context was the currency that everyone was using. Today, obviously, that's not the case. The US dollar is the reserve currency. Do you think, what's your message from this story in terms of people thinking about going back towards a gold standard, for example? Does it solve the problem? Because you're sort of giving the example where it didn't, but also that doesn't really negate the value of the gold standard, saying this one example, because it was really someone just using the gold standard very poorly. What's your view on that, where the US dollar is in this current environment? I mean, we've seen gold at all-time highs, so there's obviously lots of people, whether it's central banks or people, there's a lot of movement around the world at the moment towards wanting reserves back in gold. What's your view?
So going back to another historical thing, I was looking up before as well. I think around 1850, people started, or countries started going away from the silver standard. Why was that? Because they were mining silver so much more, it became less scarce than gold equivalently. Back when Mansa had all the gold mines, they were mining Africa. It was an untapped resource of gold.
They're probably finding it on the ground at that stage, like it wouldn't have even been
falling over themselves. Oh,
that's right.
Look at this. So back then, it became not scarce for Mansa, and he took advantage of the world market. So good for him. Silver, they did the same in the 1800s. US dollar, they're doing the same now. At least gold is scarce. There have been no huge gold mines opening up. Maybe if they start exploring, I don't know, the oceans or space, and it becomes less rare again, maybe then it can't be used. But for the moment, it's at least a scarce, measurable resource, unlike the US dollar, which is printed if you need it.
Look, absolutely fascinating. I love this article today. Just it's such a good break as well from all the stuff we've been talking about when we're so deep into politics and everything that's going on at the moment. So thank you so much for your deep dive on that. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll probably get back to those other things next week. But for now, it was a nice little holiday, I think.
History is a nice holiday from time to time, especially something so interesting that, gold might be the savior this time, and it hasn't been in history.
Yeah. Fascinating discussion as always. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll chat again soon.